Okay, now everyone's on camera. So just a reminder that we're here in the Friday Ecology Seminar Series, which used to be hosted in the nice lunchroom at the Kansas Biological Survey. We hope to have them back there again soon, but we hope to even continue perhaps this venue, this opportunity for people to see that can't get into KBS. But just as a reminder, everyone's muted during the talk. And if you have a question or an announcement for the group, just send it through the chat and it'll come to me. And then we'll ask people after the seminar. We normally don't ask that people turn off their cameras, but it sometimes can help with just everybody being able to view it during the formal talk. But then after we can open it up. And I know Dana has planned more of a conversation at parts for like what we can do moving forward. So we'll open it more up after that, after she's done with the presentation. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Dana Peterson, who was kind enough to agree to give us an overview today. She's an associate researcher at the Kansas Biological Survey, whose research really focuses on how to use GIS tools and to understand land cover, geospatial analyses. She's done an amazing amount of extra work that she didn't always have to do, like helping out at Free State and helping out with lots of other small projects. And she's going to talk today, I think, a bit about her work with drones that she's done a couple of trainings with, but also just generally what kind of tools we could use. So thanks again, Dana, for taking the time to talk to us all, and I'll let you take it from there. And I'll just ask you to unmute, which I think I can.
Ooh.
There we go.
Okay, let me share my screen here. Okay, so let's get this up. Okay, does it show in it that it's in the right mode? I have two screens here. I want to make sure I'm sharing the right one.
It's not full screen yet. It's just kind of the PowerPoint as if you were going through it yourself.
Okay. Let me share the other screen then. How about now?
All good.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you for having me here today. My talk is going to be kind of threefold. I'm going to give you an overview of the KansasView program that's within KBS at the University of Kansas. Talk a little bit about NEON's remote sensing data that they've been collecting over the KU field station. And then lastly, demo a web mapping application that houses these data. And hopefully that will provide an opportunity to discuss some future research ideas that we may have either today or ongoing in the future. Of course, I'm going to have problems here with slide advancement. I don't know, I may have done this wrong. Okay, here we go. Did that advance?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So just to tell you what about KansasView, KansasView is one of the charter members of an AmericaView program. And what AmericaView is it's a national university-based, state-implemented consortium that has a goal of advancing the use of remote sensing data and technology through education and outreach, workforce development, applied research, and technology transfer to both the public and private sectors. And this is made possible through a grant from the U.S. Geological Survey. And what individual state views do, like Kansas, we develop our focus and projects that focus around education outreach or research. And we sometimes partner with other state views, but we go through an annual formal peer review proposal and reporting process. Here's a map showing the membership of AmericaView. We have 39 active states with more than 350 individual members. And over the years, since the early 2000s, AmericaView as a consortium has completed hundreds of remote sensing related projects and trained thousands of individuals. So we collectively come together and share information, share research ideas, we share educational materials. So we try to leverage each other's work as well. So Kansas is a charter member. We've been active for 17 years. 15 of those years were led by Stephen Egbert. I've since taken over with his retirement. But through those years, we've really focused on promoting remote sensing education by providing research scholarships with partner academic institutions like Fort Hays State, Emporia, K-State. We've developed some new remote sensing courses and activities at both KU and Haskell, including a drone course we taught at KU in the fall of 2019. We've developed a GI science certification program at Haskell. We've mentored students and sponsored events. We've also focused on database development. That includes land cover. We have libraries of inundation mapping that Jude has also participated in. And we've developed these for Kansas for use by other academic institutions and state agencies in the private sector. And within Kansas and most other state views, we develop a partnership or a consortium. And I have listed here our current consortium members, a lot of the academic institutions within Kansas, as well as the Kansas GIS Policy Board that connects us with a lot of state agencies, and the Data Access and Support Center at the Kansas Geological Survey. Our current activities, last year, we acquired and processed the NEON remote sensing data for the KU field station, with the goal that we wanted to promote the educational and research use of these rich, expensive data sets that they've been acquiring. And that was in collaboration with Chris Bishop, who's at CARS. And this year, we're developing a web mapping application to house the NEON data that Chris has put together. And that goal is to allow us to visually explore the data and hopefully educate people on remote sensing data and what data are available through NEON, and hopefully spur research questions and collaborations. And David Weekly, he's currently working on this. So we're going to demo a beta version, but this is a work in progress. So just an overview of looking at the NEON field sites. We have in the Prairie Peninsula is where the KU field station and the Kansa are located. We also have some aquatic core sites and relocatable sites in the Prairie Peninsula as well. Try to get my mouse over there so I can, there, okay. So in addition to the remote sensing data, many of us probably know that NEON is also collecting a whole suite of data across both terrestrial and aquatic sites. There's 47 sites, terrestrial sites, and 34 aquatic sites that are included in NEON. And we also have field sites that are located across 24 states. So they're really trying to collect a continental scale of information that can be used. And along with the AOP data, we have field scientists that are collecting information on plants, animals, pathogens, microbes. We have soil sensors that are being collected at the terrestrial sites. We have the Flux Tower out at the KU field station collecting atmospheric data. We also have there's also instruments that are collecting stream, lake, and groundwater data at particular aquatic sites as well. So there's a lot of information covering a lot of different components of the landscape that can hopefully help inform some really complex research questions. To give you a background about the Airborne observation platform data, that's the remote sensing data that they're collecting. It covers a regional scale, and they're generating a lot of high resolution data products, which means 1 meter square or less in some cases. And on the platform, they have 3 payloads. They have waveform LIDAR, imaging spectrometer data, and then a camera system. So a little bit about LIDAR. They're collecting data. It's an active system that's on the platform where the sensor is basically emitting laser pulses of light. And when those pulses bounce back off the objects, the sensor is recording the time it takes for each pulse to return, and it can calculate the distance traveled. And so what NEON's data is collecting is called full waveform LIDAR, and then discrete returns. And this image over here on the right in red shows you the entire data distribution, which is the full waveform data for this particular canopy. And the discrete returns are basically identifying those peaks in the curve and returning those as discrete return information. So what these data provide is structural information about the landscape. The second system is the imaging spectrometer system. It's a passive system that's measuring reflected solar energy, and it has a 1 meter square spatial resolution like the LIDAR. The interesting part is that we're collecting across, or they are collecting across a very wide range of the electromagnetic spectrum. And they're collecting data at 5 nanometer intervals to represent each band. So there's 426 total bands that are collecting data across that entire spectrum. And the reflected energy, what we can do is use that to identify landscape composition and detect internal processes of imaged features, which is primarily vegetation is their focus. And so when you think about this data, it's basically a data cube that you can use to answer some more complex research questions about vegetation. This is a spectral response curve that's going across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. And what we're seeing here, get my mouse back, is that we have 2 different tree types that are showing us what remote sensors call like a typical vegetation curve against litter, wood, and soil. And so when we look across these 3 classes, we see that there's some clear distinctions across the entire electromagnetic spectrum that allows us to characterize the land surface. Even though there's some similarities between the needle leaf and broadleaf tree canopies, there are still some distinctions. And these distinctions are how energy is being absorbed, these small dips, or how it's being reflected across the electromagnetic spectrum. And this can also answer questions. Different portions can indicate different information about the land surface. Like for vegetation, the visible can, in this area over here, let me get my mouse back, is telling you information about chlorophyll and pigments, whereas the near infrared portion is telling you more about nitrogen and leaf and water cellular scattering, water content. And then the shortwave infrared is telling you more information about lignin content, cellulose, sugars, structures, or starches, and proteins. So each portion of the spectrum is giving you unique information about the image surfaces on the landscape. And this can even go to a species level. So this is an example of the spectral response curves for different tree species. And even though the overall typical response curve is very similar, we are seeing some distinctions that could allow us to get at species level information. Third, we have the digital camera system. It provides sub-meter spatial resolution, and it has a high spatial accuracy. And it's largely to provide context for the LIDAR and the spectrometer data that's a little bit more coarse at the 1 meter. And I'll show you some of that data in the web mapping application as well. And so here are the NEON remote sensing data products they've developed. It goes from level 1 to level 3. Level 1 being more of the raw data that they're collecting on the platform. And then level 2, they're deriving some particular indices, vegetation indices from the spectradiometer data or spectrometer data. And then 3, they've even added some additional like leaf area index and fraction of photosynthetically active radiation. And this is not new in remote sensing. There's been decades of research that has been done to identify what portions of the electromagnetic spectrum best correspond to or model certain vegetation characteristics. So there's a wealth of knowledge out in the literature that supports a lot of the spectral indices that NEON has created from the spectrometer data. And the same with using these indices. There's a lot of research that's been done to show how some of these indices relate to the functional characteristics or role of vegetation, such as gross primary production and energy balance, light use efficiency, biogeochemical cycling, and stress indication. So we know that NEON's collecting field level data. I mean, I think spatial scale and temporal scale is very important when we're looking at using existing data. So while we know that they're collecting a lot, you know, we have these field campaigns, they're collecting a lot of detailed information, and they're also supplying the airborne systems. When we think about our research questions, we may identify, even with this existing data, that there are data gaps. And that's kind of this goal of including this figure, is that there's other instrumentation that maybe we could be using if our research isn't being able to be answered with existing NEON data. There could be additional field campaigns that could complement the data that are being collected at the NEON sites if needed. Or there's even coarser resolution or satellite imagery that could be used, or other geospatial data sets that could be incorporated to allow for some of the more complex research questions to be answered. So I was just going to showcase a couple of publications that are using the NEON data. This one, they're looking at foliar functional traits using the spectrometer data from NEON. And they're looking across a number of biomes in Eastern North America. And from what I read, they're planning to expand this to the rest of the US as well. And what we see here are some of the different indices in the columns, and then these are different site locations. They looked at more than this, but this is just one of the graphics. And then on the bottom row, we have Talladega National Forest in Missouri. And then the second one up is the Kansa. And so we can see that there's information provided by the camera system. So red, green, blue. That provides some information, but when you start looking at specific indices, you start seeing different trends start to pop out and different distributions of data that you may not be able to see with just a general visible spectrum. And so I just kind of wanted to show this as comparison to look at some of the data products like nitrogen, leaf mass area, chlorophyll, and such. There's other researchers that are using the NEON data for tree species identification. Some are using a technique called image segmentation, incorporating all of those data layers to define individual tree crowns. This is a new publication. December 1, hasn't been published yet, where they're mapping 3D variation in leaf mass area using the spectrometer data and LIDAR combined in a temporal broadleaf forest. And so these are just to kind of let you know like what current research are utilizing NEON data. And I also wanted to include this book I found as a resource. Like if you're interested in learning more about vegetation properties and how they relate to spectrometer data or spectroscopy, this is an open access textbook that you can download that gets into the background and what research has been done, and really opens up more ideas and concepts that maybe some of us aren't very aware of at this moment, including myself. So that gave you an overview of the AOP data that's being collected out at the field station. And now I just want to take this time to go into the web mapping application so we can look at some of these data layers. And as I mentioned before, this is in beta form. So we've been working on this very recently. And what's showing as you open the viewer is the map of the KU field station in the red boundary. And then
Dana, we're still seeing the PowerPoint. Sorry, just a link on the PowerPoint.
Let me drag that. Here we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. So we see the red outline, the KU field station. And what we have over here is a layer list of the data that we've incorporated so far. And we see the colored locations here, these points. They're indicating the different types of field data collections that are occurring out at the KU field station. So let's start with looking at, and this is very free flowing, so people can stop and ask questions. I'm going to demo one little area, and then I'd really like to hear from people, like if they want to look at different areas or have conversations about what remote sensing can do. That's kind of the goal of the rest of this talk. And so here's a subset of the high resolution camera data. So it's sub-meter. And I was going to zoom into this area where we have a mix of land cover types. And let's zoom as far in as we can so you can get an idea of the resolution of these data. So we're looking at individual trees here. So that's giving us high resolution imagery, but maybe not differentiating some of the other characteristics of the vegetation. And that's where the vegetation indices come from. And so we're going to look at, this is from 2018. So we're going to go ahead and look at some of the vegetation indices from 2018. And I think a lot of us are familiar with the normalized difference vegetation index, which is a surrogate for biomass, basically, and vegetation health. So let's turn off the high resolution data, and we can start to see that there are some patterns in the biomass across the field station. And so what we're seeing here, I believe, are eastern red cedar. And the rest of this is deciduous forest. Let's look at what the nitrogen level would tell us. And we even see more distinction and more variability. And basically, like I'm sure a lot of the plant ecologists within KBS and at KU could be a little bit more, could provide more information about maybe what these are showing us. But, nitrogen and foliage, if you don't know, is related to the maximum photosynthetic rate and capacity in net primary production. We can also look at lignin, and it's corresponding to water transport, stress resistance, and can be indicative of surface plant litter.
I didn't scale lignin very well, just FYI.
Oh, okay. Thank you, David. And here we have phytochemical reflectance index, which is basically looking at xanthophyll pigments in live foliage. And it can be indicative of light use efficiency and the rate of CO2 uptake by foliage. And some of the studies I found were using this to study vegetation productivity and stress and to assess overall ecosystem health. And so again, these are all individual indices that can be displayed individually, or they could be combined in a red, blue, green color system, which I don't have the functionality to do that right at the moment. But there's capabilities here that we can build into this for data visualization. The other thing we can do, another function that David put in here, was called a swipe. And so we're going to compare what Xanfill looked like in 2018 versus 2017. I think I need to turn another one off there. So by sliding back and forth, we can see that there are some changes. And one of the things I need to look up is when the date of acquisition were for these. They're always acquired during peak productivity. So we want the leaf-on conditions, obviously, to measure some of these properties. But that timing could occur, I believe, anywhere from May through July, depending on weather conditions.
Hey, Dana.
Yes.
This is Jude. I've asked you this question multiple times over the years, I guess. But now in particular, could you comment on the calibration? You know, you're comparing 2 years here. So what should we know about the differences in the values between the two? I mean, are we looking for, you know, correlations might be valid, but the values are a little iffy, or are the values directly comparable?
So I emailed Tristan. He is the lead scientist for the AOP data in NEON. And he said that they should be scaled appropriately to look at interannual differences. What they have been working on is reprocessing 2016 and before data. And that's an email I just received from him yesterday. And so I'm making the assumption that the scales are appropriate. They've been calibrated. But I think that there's some temporal differences here too that you would need to account for. One of the other challenges, which I'll show here, is with the 2019 data. Let me zoom out here. For the NDVI, the vegetation indices, I saw that there's some striping issues. So these are the flight lines when you see these anomalies or artifacts in the data. And so I need to have a better understanding of if and how we can deal with flight line issues. And I believe that they are here for a time period to try to collect the entire site, but depending on cloud conditions, those could happen on different days. And so it's not clear to me how we could handle and work with some of the striping that might be in the data as another artifact.
Dana, Bob was asking, their audio is a bit sketchy, but he was just asking what, we see what some of the years you have there, which years are included, like when did it start at the field station? And he was saying that he knew that some of the years weren't maybe successful with AOP. I think that's what you were just touching on.
Right. So we should have a catalog of successful flights. They usually send out an email report when they're flying. So I would need to go back and take a look at that. But I also have a map here showing, let me see here. I believe we've had 4 collections. So I thought it was starting in 2016. And so that doesn't include 2020, which they actually did fly over the KU field station in Kansa. They didn't fly all the sites this year due to COVID, but we were fortunate enough to get a flight in this year. So that would be something I'd have to look at, because that's important to know the quality of the data, and they provide that information in terms of cloud conditions, which can have an impact on you know, how you calibrate the data. So I think that we could easily use these data to start potentially for future research, you know, being able to separate some of the invasive species like juniper from other canopy types, and maybe even have, depending on the field data that's being collected at KU Field Station, have opportunities to try to do species type mapping, which we haven't done before. We haven't had this level of data, this type of data. It's very expensive for multiple years, and I think there's some promise there. But I'm also interested to hear from other individuals what types of research questions they feel like they could answer having some of these vegetation indices or the full wave LIDAR data, and using that as an integrated data set to answer some complex questions about ecosystem functioning and how that varies based on disturbance or environmental gradients, those kinds of things. And I think let me post this link within the Zoom so people can have it.
I have a question for either you or perhaps David. You know, when you were just doing that slider example, was the same color palette used for both years?
Same color palette and same scaling.
Well, yeah, I mean, same scaling is the more important question, I guess. Yes, thank you.
So I have a question on the scale of resolution that you can get. So like in the dimensions plots, we have species composition at 2 meter square plots. Would it be possible to get the data that you're showing at that scale?
And Jim, can you direct me to where those plots are located? Is it?
Well, you're in 2018, so they were just set up there. They're right. So if you follow the road by the reservoir, you can sort of see the pattern right where your cursor was. Your cursor went over it a little bit to the right of the top reservoir.
Oh, okay.
So those are the reflections of the rainout shelters, but down by the road are plots that are not covered. No, but the 2018 down here is not covered over all the years.
So I just put on the 2019 data.
Yeah, so you can't see the plots very well. They don't stand out like they did in the previous year, but that's because there's vegetation everywhere. So, but we do have species composition there if you wanted to try to differentiate prairie species.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Dana and Jim, I want to continue this conversation. I just wanted to let everybody know, I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording for what we'll post. And it seems like this is a great opportunity for a question and answer, but as it may be more free flowing, maybe we'll go ahead and just stop here for the recording, and then I'll let you guys get back to it.